We're up to the stage now of fitting the pusher rods. We put the belts in. We've used that broken hacksaw blade to line up the pulleys. We've checked the carriage to see how smooth it is. We've got as much slack out of it as we can. We've gone around and we've checked all the nuts are tight, so everyone's checked that it's tight, it's moved. You still can push this a few millimetres either way. So it's not that rigid. You could put a top plate on if you want it more rigid. I've put the cap screws in, put the top ones in first. Now out in the workshop, what I did is I got a piece of wood. Just get yourself a flat piece of wood. I've milled the top part of it flat, as you can see in these photos, and then I've just drilled neatly. You drill it 3.8, 3.9 and 4mm each hole, and it was 230 from one end to the other, which is that distance. I then put in the round tool steel, 4mm tool steel, put one in and in the other, and adjust these to get them to the 230. Now, what would be a 30-second job if these were the correct type of tie rods, turnbuckles, but they're not. As I've said in the earlier videos, one should be a right-hand thread, the other should be a left-hand thread. And as you turn the bar, they both go in and out equally. Trouble here is that the accuracy that you can get can be a maximum of half the thread pitch. If you look up 4mm pitch, that is for one complete turn of the eye bolt. Now, as these need to be both parallel so as they can turn equally, so that's not hitting on there and that's not hitting on there, and when you go to move it, it locks. So that's one face parallel and you've got half a turn, so that's half the thread. So that means that if you want that to be 230 and it's half the thread out, you can turn it and it'll be exactly 230. But let's just say you want it to be a quarter of the thread. Can't. It can only be a quarter over or a quarter under. So what you have to do, you have to try to match your rods as close as possible. You fit them in, you nip them up, but then I've got the double nut, and as you tighten it, that also moves it a bit. So you're a bit of a dog chasing its tail. Screw them in with the nylock nuts on here, but in the effector, I've only tried it out with the nuts because I've just put it up to test it. Now, and they're all up at maximum. That really should be parallel to the table. So that's one way you can check. When you put the heat bed on, measure it, might be 0.4 of a degree like on the table here. Put it up there, it needs to be 0.4. So you can check it. That way you can check if you've got any troubles. But the next thing you got to do is check for clearance. Now, I added 2 washers there to match this dimension. But unfortunately, up the top, up the top, up the top, they are binding. They can spin individually, but they can lock. Right. Clear? Binding. So depending on the combination of moves you make, This may tilt this way, and then when it comes over there it may tilt that way. So they are binding. So there's 2 ways out, or 3 ways out. One is to remove the washers, then check to see if they bind, and if they don't, then I need to machine these thicknesses down the 1/2 mil that the washers are. If I take the washers out, tighten it up, and it still binds down here, that means that gap is even wider. So I will need to machine that in. So as the gap between those two opens up, and then that will allow it to clear. And when I finally find the clearance measurement, just say it's 1.5 mm or 2 mil I have to machine off, I then have to do the same for all those to keep these parallel. As you can see, trigonometry to measure where that point in space has to be. So if it wants to go around flat, you can see that they all have to calculate up and down, which will then push this way, that way, that way, or that way. So I will now take these out. Oh, the other option is grinding the actual body of these so as they clear. I don't know how much it is without measuring, but these outer edge of the here is actually touching the ball, so that's how far out it is. So take the washers out, check it. If that improves it, you just have to take off this part now. The vertical carriage part can stay there, but the belt clip can come off. Mill those, then come back and do your right. So in the centre it's fine, over to one side, that's how much it's moving. So the problem seems to be when they're sitting that way. Clear, tight. It may only need to be thickness of 2 pieces of paper. I don't know, but this is where you have to adjust and try and adjust and try. Because as you can see, so far as we've been building, all the errors have been adding up. So once that's done, I'll get back to you and we'll then move on to your factor.